Well, last week we celebrated Easter, and our focus was rightly on Jesus' death and resurrection, the cornerstone of our faith. We spoke about how the Easter events deal with sin and death, and they provide us with hope for the future. But all this is set within the context of the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God. In fact, we started the Easter celebrations on Palm Sunday, and that was with Jesus' entry into Jerusalem as a royal procession. Do you remember that? Yeah, it was a city welcoming its king. Good Friday was the day when we considered Jesus' death on the cross, but for early Christians, the cross was seen as Jesus' throne, and the crown of thorns, his royal crown. Well, today we commence our new series on the kingdom of God, what it is, what it looks like, and what it has to do with each of us as followers of Jesus. The number one thing that Jesus talked about more than anything else was the kingdom of God. It's everywhere in the Gospels, and it's impossible to miss. The coming Jesus as the king to establish his kingdom is so important that the gospel writers use the word kingdom 126 times in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So the good news of Jesus' kingdom was a pretty big deal. So if the theme of the kingdom is so significant, then we need to make sure that we know what it means. Not only must we understand God's kingdom, but as his followers, we are to live in it and carry its message. To be honest though, it's often quite confusing for many followers of Jesus. So first, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. And I did steal this. Now, where was it from? The Bible Project. So I'll probably post a little video of this on our Facebook All-In page that you might like to have a look at afterwards, just to go over it again for you during the week. But this little background kind of leads us up. We kind of need to understand this to be able to understand the kingdom. There is a beautiful poem in the book of Isaiah, and Stuart's just been reading from the scriptures about this. The city of Jerusalem had just been destroyed by Babylon. It was a great kingdom in the north, and all these Jewish people, they'd been sent away into exile. You're following me so far? Because we're going to get a little bit deep, right? So I just want to make sure you're with me. A few people remained in Jerusalem, but they were left wondering what had happened and whether their God had abandoned them, because Jerusalem was supposed to be the city where God would reign over the world to bring peace and blessing to everyone. Now, Isaiah had been saying that Jerusalem's destruction was a mess of Israel's own making. They had turned away from their God. They had become corrupt, and so their city and their temple were destroyed, and everything seemed lost. But the poem goes on. There is a watchman on the city walls, and far out on the hills they saw a messenger coming, and he's running towards the city, and he's shouting, "Good news, good news!" And Isaiah says, "How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news." Why are they beautiful feet? Well, the feet are beautiful because they are carrying a message. They are carrying a beautiful message. A message that despite Jerusalem's destruction, Israel's God still reigns as king, and that God himself is going to one day return to this city, take up his throne, and bring peace. And the watchmen sing for joy because of the good news that their God still reigns. Now fast forward over to the New Testament, and we find the same phrase, the good news, And the Greek word for this is euangelion. Did I do it right? Euangelion. And it's also sometimes translated with the word gospel. So when Christians say, do you believe the gospel? They mean, do you believe the good news? But the word gospel doesn't just refer to any good news like, Elva, good news, I found a car park right outside the front door. That's not that good news he's talking about. In the Bible, the phrase gospel is always talking about the announcement of the reign of a new king. In the New Testament, the Gospels also use the phrase the gospel to summarize all of Jesus' teachings. They say he went about proclaiming the good news or the gospel of God's kingdom. You still with me? Okay, good. Excellent. So Jesus himself saw himself as the messenger who was bringing the good news that God reigns. But the way that he described God's reign surprised everybody. The Jewish people were expecting a powerful, successful king who would come and defeat their enemies. His kingdom would need to be strong and able to impose its will, bringing peace and justice. But Jesus didn't come like that, did he? He was not like other kings who used their power for their own advancement. Jesus said the greatest person in God's kingdom was the weakest and the one who loves and serves the poor. Now, Jesus also said that this kingdom was arriving with him. He was not only announcing God's kingdom, but he was also announcing that he was the king of this kingdom. So, of course, word gets out that this Jewish man from Galilee is talking and acting like he's the king of Israel. He's appointed 12 disciples, which are an image of Israel's 12 tribes. He's healing people. He's forgiving people of their sins. And all of this so threatened Israel's leaders that they finally decided all they could do was have him killed. And Jesus let them, which is a weird thing to do if you're trying to become king. But for Jesus, this is what had to happen. Jesus saw the sin and devastation of his people Israel as just one small part of the entire human condition, how all humanity had rebelled against God, resulting in the tragedy and devastation of the whole world. So how would God bring his reign over such a world? Well, Jesus believed that it would be through an act of sacrificial love for his enemies. This is why in the Gospels, Jesus' crucifixion is depicted as an enthronement of the King of the Jews. He receives his crown of thorns, and he also receives a robe. He is exalted up, not onto a throne, but onto a cross. How beautiful are the feet that bring good news. And the good news now is that Jesus has defeated death and he reigns as king. That he has dealt with our sin and corruption himself, and that he has conquered it with his life and with his love. And then Jesus sent his followers out to go and keep announcing this good news of this upside down kingdom, and to invite everyone to give their allegiance to him as the king who defeated death with his love. So, with that context in mind, today as we commence this series, it's important we start by establishing an understanding of what this kingdom of God that Jesus was announcing actually is. Now, as we start this series on the kingdom of God, I want to flag with you that the phrase the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven are also used interchangeably throughout the Gospels, but they pretty much mean the same thing. It's a bit tricky for us, of course. We don't really have any kingdoms left in the world that are like the ones that were in the New Testament. Sure, in Australia, we technically have a king, the King of Australia, the King Charles III. Some of us would have watched his coronation last year, and some of us would have been excited about all the pomp and ceremony. And some of us would have probably shaken our heads in bewilderment. But after the coronation, life just went on as it had before, yeah? Not much changed. We didn't live our lives any differently because there was a new king. Well, in the ancient days, the times when the Bible was written, this was not the case. Who was on the throne very much did matter. A new king usually meant a new way of life. New kings came with different priorities, different ways of dealing with people and so on, and they were often driven by their own personal agendas, much like people in power today and throughout the ages. A kingdom, I'm going to do a bit of politics now. A kingdom is a monarchy. A monarchy is a system of government where one person has all the power. It isn't a place of anarchy or chaos where anything goes. And it's not a democracy where the people rule. In kingdoms, kings reign sovereign. They have all the power above all others. So Jesus Christ is the king of the kingdom he came to establish on earth. And there is no other authority or ruler. Where you have a king and a people under that king's reign, you have a kingdom. Are you confused yet? I hope not. I'll say it a few other ways. God's kingdom is not a place or a people. God's kingdom does not exist because there are borders which define the land, or because there are people who call themselves the king's subjects. The kingdom of God is not a church or a denomination. The kingdom of God is not the Salvation Army. Ideally, it would reflect the kingdom of God, but in and of itself, it is not. The kingdom of God is wherever Jesus' rule and reign exists. Simple as that. Now, it's important to remember that just because people name themselves Christians, it does not necessarily mean they are part of the kingdom. People and places are part of the kingdom of God, yes, but only when they give their allegiance to Jesus, placing him above all else, allowing him to rule and reign in their lives. In Matthew 6, verse 33, Jesus says, "Seek the kingdom of God above all else." And then in Matthew 7:21, he says, "Not everyone who calls out to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who actually do the will of my Father in heaven will enter." So when we say Jesus is king, we are saying that he reigns over our lives. So what does it mean for Jesus to reign? Well, to help us understand, think about when you have visitors to stay, if you ever have visitors to stay at your house. Most visitors who stay get given a bedroom and a bed. They eat what the household eats and they do what the household does. They don't usually get the authority to run around moving the furniture and inviting other people over to share the household with their friends. And they certainly don't get to tell the hosts what to do. Nothing really changes while they are there. Then when family or close friends come to stay, it gets a little bit more relaxed. As some of you know, Stuart and I have the great blessing of having had some of our family with us over this past week, and it's just lovely to have Emma and Jack. Emma is our daughter, and Jack, her boyfriend, and he's part of the family too. And it's when they come to stay, I love having them, but I want to make their stay as comfortable as possible. So I asked them what they would like to do, what they want to eat. Sometimes I can make it happen, and sometimes I can't. We often change our rhythm while family are staying. Maybe we stay up a little bit later or do activities that we wouldn't normally do. Some of my family like to give advice or an opinion on what perhaps the house should look like and where to place the furniture. They have opinions, but they don't really have any authority to tell me what to do. When they leave, things generally go back to normal, how it was before they came, as if they hadn't stayed, except, of course, the great memories. But when Jesus as King comes to stay, he gets to move the furniture around to where he wants it. He gets to change the schedule and the rhythm to suit his purposes. He has the say as to what activities we do, what we should spend our money on, our time on. He directs our priorities and our actions according to his will. He changes the way that we live. This is what it means for us to live under the reign of Jesus. When we say Jesus is the Lord or ruler of our lives. So as believers of Christ, we are to worship him as Lord. Acknowledging Christ as the Lord is, in effect, recognising his reign. We are to live out his will, his teaching, and to live in anticipation of his return. This is how the kingdom of God comes and is present in our world. When Jesus taught his disciples how to pray, part of the directive was to pray that God's kingdom would come into its fullness on earth. Matthew 6:10, your kingdom come, which really means your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So the kingdom of God exists where we allow the rule and reign of Jesus in our lives, which in turn impacts the world around us. So as we commence this series, the first question for us to consider, knowing what we now know about the kingdom, is whether Jesus actually is the King of our lives. Thinking about the example we looked at earlier, does he get to move the furniture around? Or are we only asking his opinion? Or worse still, is he only a visitor that pops in and out when it suits us without actually changing the way that we live? The first disciples had their lives radically changed, transformed, when they realised finally, after the crucifixion and resurrection, that Jesus really was King. The book of Acts shows this remarkable transformation, and I encourage you to read that. Today's disciples should be transformed no less radically. Are we radically changed? Or is Jesus more of our mascot than our King? If I'm truly honest with myself, I don't always live my life at times this way. For me, I need to regularly rededicate my life, my thoughts, my attitudes, my actions to align with the reign of Christ in my life. A constant prayer for me is reign in me. And we're going to sing that as an act of dedication. It's a beautiful chorus that simply says, reign in me. Sovereign Lord, reign in me. Let your kingdom come. Let your will
be done. Establish here your throne. Reign in me. If it is your desire that Jesus reign as King over your life, I invite you to sing these words. You may like to come and pray and rededicate your life to Jesus. A place of prayer is here, or you may wish to pray where you are seated.